Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Conversations about Art. My name is J. Allen Constant. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm here with Paul Rowland from, well, actually, he lives near Tokyo, Japan, correct? Today, we are going to be talking to Sharon Habib from Vancouver, Canada. So, welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
First of all, we'd like to ask you how you got involved in art, whatever education you've had and how you got started.
Well, I don't have any formal education whatsoever in art. I took art as one of my primary subjects in high school, and the principal of the art school told my mother, well into my first year, that I didn't have what it takes to be an artist, but he did say that my artistic talent might come out later in my life. And I thought at the time he was just letting my mom down gently, but maybe there was some truth to that. So I didn't study art, but I was always involved in creative things. And I brought drawing into my work. I worked as a speech therapist, speech pathologist in my first career. And I used to, for language training, I used to draw little scenes for the kids that came to see me. And I still have some of those. And I look back at them and I think, oh, wow, I was doing that way back then, but I was always into something creative. And then around sort of my late 20s, early 30s, I got really interested in the idea of painting. So I did go for art lessons to a teacher who worked realistically, and that was where I started, was with realistic um, life drawing or life painting. And she too wouldn't teach me. She said, "You'll find your own way." So I did. I had to boonie bash my way into finding myself as an artist. And so for the first 4 years of exploring painting, I was trying to do realistic work, and then um, decided I'd like to find what was original within myself if I could, because I was copying. And that was when I got into the very hard path of abstract art. And it took me many years to find my footing, but I persevered. There's just something about it. So I'm self-taught with a little bit of maybe mentoring here and there, but really so little it's not worth speaking about.
Well, thank you for that introduction. So, do these have different titles than what you gave me? Because I just texture one.
So yeah, they do have different titles. The next two are from a series I called El Morro. El Morro is a very old fort on the peninsula in Puerto Rico, and it's an old Spanish fort, and it has the most incredibly beautifully weathered walls. They've just been exposed to the elements for hundreds of years, and to the salt air, and they're just extraordinary. And while everybody else all the other tourists were out there photographing the beautiful view from the fort, I was kind of moving along the wall like this with my camera. I just couldn't get enough of this texture. So the texture from those walls, and also from the Navajo desert, um, is what inspired my El Morro series. So I worked a lot with texture. And I didn't work with paintbrushes. I don't know if I had a paintbrush. If I did, I might have had one. So I used my hands, even to paint that smooth background. I was using a gloved hand, but I was using things like sand just out of the backyard, spackle, I was often in Home Depot looking for materials that I could sort of stick onto walls and then really dig into with a screwdriver and a hammer sometimes. It was very physical. It was almost sculptural. It is the reason why I don't do this anymore, because it was so physical that it actually hurt my hands. But I did that for many years, and I just loved the way when I diluted my paint with water and then would just literally pour it onto I was painting on plywood. So nice small smooth surface, and then it would just find its way. The paint would find its way into the grooves and uneven surface. So I almost felt like I wasn't painting really. It was the texture was painting for me. And in the end, I had to actually go for lessons on how to use a paintbrush when I moved away from that. I didn't know how to paint.
So you said you were self-taught. There's
Yeah.
a lot of interesting textures in this piece. Did you just arrive at this by playing and experimenting?
No, as an artist, you would know that by exposing yourself to other people's art, you get all manner of ideas. And I was very friendly with an artist whose work I really admired. Um, Originally from Morocco, and then he immigrated to Canada, a fellow by the name of Alain Attar. And his work was very heavily textured, also using materials from Home Depot, spackle and plaster and whatnot. And he actually gave me insights into materials that I could use. So I did have some construction training, I guess, from a friend. But everything else is self-taught, coming to the composition. I looked at a lot of Tapieza's work, um, and other similar, very sort of moody, atmospheric kinds of works, and then try to find something that was my own. So I came to this series not wanting to fill the canvas. You know, Japanese design. So Paul, you would be the expert on this, but Japanese design resonates really strongly with me. I love how they just managed to create balance with space. So if you sort of imagine a long shelf and they'll put a vase on one end of it, and that's it. It's just the weight of this volume of space balances it out perfectly. And so that's something I tried to achieve, was to have maybe a part of the canvas that was a focal point, and then nothing else to balance it. So that's how I got to this. The next one shows the space was dark, like the night sky. I've always found building on an idea hard to do. How do I get to keep within a theme, but then create variation within that theme, just to let one's imagination go? I find that hard to do, because I find once I've thought of one thing, my brain seems to have made a pattern out of it, and it gravitates to that pattern right away. After doing speech therapy, I moved into the business world in communication. So, being a communicator, putting words to things, I find very helpful. And as soon as I came up with words to describe what I was trying to achieve, which is a patchwork of different textures, that word patchwork then was an anchor and a lever for me to sort of build on this idea of a focal point with interest in it, sort of rectangular kind of. I gravitated once I'd sort of really injured myself with all that heavy texturing. I looked for another idea, another object that I could sing, sort of you pivot my compositions around, and I thought of crosses. I'm not a religious person at all, but crosses are kind of universal. I looked at heraldry and all the different types of crosses, and it's just a beautifully balanced and simple image. And then I did go and see another artist. I think I had 2 or 3 lessons with her on how to use paintbrush. And then I just continued finding ways of creating the impression of texture. You can see in the middle of this cross, there is a little bit of sand still. I moved away from that fairly quickly. In the end, what I did was I scrape off a lot more paint than I put on the canvas, and I would keep the scrapings, and then I would put that into the paint, and that would give me texture. So I wasn't actually putting that into the environment. It made me feel quite good as well. I work with acrylic paints. So I did a whole series on crosses, and this one and the next one are just variations on that theme of crosses. This one uses paint, scraped off paint for the texturing, and then I'd just sort of experiment with all sorts of other techniques. Like if you look on the horizontal arm of the cross on the left hand side, there's that sort of patchy green and white. With that, I'd had a green, just rough painting, this and that, but with greens and oranges. And then I used wood glue. I glued a tea towel, an old tea towel on top of it. And when it was semi-dry, I ripped it off. And that was how I got that particular texture, which I've tried to replicate many times. I haven't succeeded as well as in this particular painting. And then I got even more abstract with my crosses. If you look at the next one, and that sort of led me to think about crossing an intersection, a crisscrossing, as it were. And so this was one from those series. And again, being a communicator in my other life, words are made up of letters. And I found that letters and numbers could be used to create texture. So I started doing that quite a lot as well. And you'll also notice in this one, I start to use lines, like there are those vertical lines and they go horizontally as well. That has stayed in my work, even though I've evolved far from here. That and the words have stayed with me. So is the texturing. I can't help myself.
Let's go back to the first cross we were looking at.
Yes.
When you do a piece like this, do you work out a composition before you start, or you just jump in and see how a composition emerges?
I usually jump in and then have to course correct quite a lot because what I see in my head doesn't often translate onto the canvas. And so what I might have done for this was, and I don't remember, but I might have decided, okay, I'm just going to fill the whole canvas with the cross shape from edge to edge to edge. And then you don't want it to be even because that's not so interesting. So then you elongate one little bit and shorten another, or maybe put something at an angle. There's this constant playing. I've learned to do that playfulness or correcting. I've learned to do that on a computer now that I'll photograph the painting and bring it into this free program called Krita, Krita. It's like Photoshop, but it's free. And I'll experiment, I'll make my adaptations in that. It saves me a lot of paint and a lot of effort.
So when you started this, you did have an idea of a cross in mind.
Yeah.
So that was the only structure you had in mind, correct?
The only structure. And then the other sort of structure that I would have is that I want layers to shine through. So I want the history of the painting to kind of be evident from earliest to latest development of it. So, and that's something I still do. But yeah, and then the mark making, those scribbles on the bottom right, those lines that kind of intersect, that's almost the last thing that I do.
Paul is the poet, so
Oh,
he
words.
often,
Yeah, I was excited to see the letters here. Do they mean anything to you, or are they just essentially random?
They are deliberately random because I want the abstract work to remain abstract and open to interpretation, so I don't want to feed it too much. But there is a lovely Vancouver artist named Pierre Coupet who does use words in his art. He uses the word bone a lot, and I think the other word he uses is rain. And those are just, they're such intriguing words and they're so open. And as soon as Paul mentioned that you were a poet, I thought, oh, I should ask you for words like that that I can use because I think sometimes people find it hard to connect with abstract. Sometimes the title is helpful, or sometimes a word might be helpful. So I shouldn't make it too hard for them.
Well, you say people find it hard to connect with abstract art, but I'm thinking more and more that there's something universal about the texture, and that's what really appeals to me. What is it about texture that appeals to you, and why do you think it's so fascinating?
I half suspect that it's our evolution. It's so interesting, Paul, because everything you've said resonates so deeply with me. So, I grew up in South Africa. I left South Africa in my late 30s. The landscape in South Africa is very rugged. These earthy colors that you're seeing in front of you right now are very South African landscape colors. But the weathering process of water and ice and everything that is has caused a rugged landscape, I think it's something that's built into our history because our history remains with us in different ways. So I don't know, that's what I think. But texturing is it's very sticky. It draws us in.
Yeah, I think you're right. That kind of connection or awareness of the environment and how it's affected, yeah, the surfaces around us, but also us as well, is just something so intriguing, isn't it?
It
Hmm.
really is. I've seen pictures of buildings in Morocco and all of that peeling paint and revealing layers of paint that are probably hundreds of years old. There's something that just draws you into that. It's just remarkable. I love it.
I know. I think we found a kindred spirit, Alan.
yeah, when you were talking about texture, I was trying to think of for myself why I am attracted to texture and those kind of things. And I consider myself an intuitive artist. So to be honest, I don't really have words for it, but it is intuitive. I'm just drawn towards it. And I'm drawn towards paintings like this, that do have a lot of texture.
Yeah, I know what you mean by not having words to it. I'm forced to put words to it, but even while I'm speaking to you, I'm thinking, I don't know if these are the right words. It's just a feeling. It's that intuition.
Well, abstract art also is an expression of, something inside of us that we don't always have words for, and perhaps different textures describes different emotions or feelings on a deeper level that are unspeakable, really. So,
Yeah, and I think it's, even if people, you must have this as well with your work, people don't understand that they feel a need to understand what they're seeing. But the texture is something they do connect with. So there are different ways to connect with abstract art, I think, depending on the abstract art. But I think there are different ways we can come in. We can like the colors, the color palette. We can maybe like the formation and the intersection and interplay with shapes, or we can be drawn to the texture. Or if it's art with a message, we can be drawn to the message. So I love that about abstract art. It's quite a broad language.
Oh, what Alan said just reminded me of the connection between sound, emotion, and color in Kandinsky's work, and other artists, like Paul Klee, for example. And I was just wondering when Alan was talking about the relationship between certain textures and certain feelings or emotions that we might be trying to express or get in touch with. Maybe there is a language of texture that hasn't been explored so much because there are lots of books about the synesthesia of color and sound, but not so much to my knowledge anyway, with regards to texture as well. And so I wonder if there is a language there that we are sort of intuitively exploring, a little bit like the needle on a record. It's sensing and bumping over the grooves to create music. Maybe that's what you're doing with your fingertips as you move across the canvas, and
Yeah,
also what we're doing with our eyes as well, which are a kind of very, very sensitive fingerprint, right? Or fingertip, sort of, feeling the world
yeah.
around us.
It's really interesting to think of it that way. And while you were speaking, Paul, I thought um, we learn about our world through textures. If babies put everything in their mouths, which is where, like your eyes, like you've just mentioned, your mouth is also very sensitive, and they kind of feel the different textures from that. So I text you. It would be really interesting to see if there've been any studies on um, our relationship with texture and the psychology of texture. I would be fascinated to read something like that.
A couple
Yeah,
minutes ago, you talked about color also, and I'm looking at this little patch of red right in the middle. And I often look at little bits of isolated color like that and try to imagine what the piece would be like without that color and be a totally different piece.
that's so true. That's so true. So one of the things I do think about um, before I start a painting is how I want somebody to feel when they're looking at it. And that might well influence the color, but it also definitely influences the composition. Mostly, I want people to feel a sense of calm and not comfort necessarily, but a sense of calm and ease. And we live in such a troubled world. And maybe that's because that's what I want to achieve. Somebody once said to me, whatever it is you're wanting your viewer to feel is what you need. And I don't know if that's true, but I it's that whole Japanese aesthetic again of less is more. And I am a minimalist. I just find it very calming. But then it can also get really boring. So then I do want that little pop of something to to be intriguing, maybe to be even a little exciting. It's kind of an interesting yin and yang I have going there, but it is something I'm aware of when I'm painting.
So this is a different series now, correct?
Yes, so this series was just exploration. It was really just trying to get myself comfortable using color, because as you can tell from what we've seen so far, I haven't used much color other than that cross with the yellow and green that was more colorful. But I was really uncomfortable with color, so I thought, well, if you're uncomfortable with it, then lean into that. So I explored color quite a lot. You can see the words in the background. Um, it's all asemic writing. That means there's no semantics to it. It just looks like writing. So it has that familiarity. And the one on the left, you can see it's the very, very first underlayer. And then in the one on the right, I would actually write on the last, probably one of the last things I did would have been this asemic writing, almost like letter writing. I kind of miss getting letters. Those were just lovely days. It was so exciting to go to the mailbox and there would be a letter. So that found its way. I use words and or word like. Actually, I should say word like because I don't use words that often, but word like structures, textures quite a lot. just think it's another way for people to connect. So these two paintings weren't painted as a diptych, but they hang in my studio as a diptych. I kind of like them together. They're not very big. They're, I think, 24 by 30. And then I'll make a confession. I'm so uncomfortable with using white. I put it on and I take so much of it off. White is a color, I guess it's not a color, but it's a color that scares me. I'm very intimidated by it. So I just finished doing a bunch of paintings for the gallery yesterday. And I thought to myself just yesterday, you really should go for lessons with somebody who uses white well and ask them to teach you how to use white. So it's a story of every painting going forward from here where I use a lot of white. It's a fight that I have with it. It's so necessary because it offsets so much, but I fight with it on every painting.
Sharon, you mentioned before that you'd started taking lessons from a realist painter. And of course, we're discussing your abstract art here, but the colors and maybe something about the composition, especially on the left hand image here, makes me think of some kind of landscape, perhaps viewed through a window. Maybe it's foggy or misty, and I'm looking outside. Perhaps some kind of sunrise, maybe a bit like a Monet composition or something like that. Is there some relation with an external reality in these paintings and in your abstract art? Are you remembering anything? Are you imagining? Or is it just simply, oh, I love that color?
No, I'm not imagining anything or trying to resemble a landscape or anything like that. I really want to sort of abstract. So not thinking of that. And then the way my colors come about is that I have very few tubes of paint. And so whatever I can get out of a combination of those is the color palette. And again, I think the few tubes of paint is one because I've never been schooled in art. So, and I really feel that I miss out in that way is understanding that different shades of blue are going to be able to do different things. I don't know all of that stuff. I could learn, and I should probably.
So this one is quite a bit different than what we've seen already. Were you trying something different, or did you just, again, playing and this is what came out?
No, I was very deliberately trying something different. I was trying to be as minimalistic as possible while still having lots to look at. And this actually is a cross shape, if you look at it. It's kind of really abstracted that. And I also tried to keep to as narrow a range of color as I could, but still keep it interesting. So this is one of my favorite paintings for me that I've ever done, but it is very, very abstract, and I didn't expect anyone to like it. And about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I put it up for sale and it was sold. So there went my favorite painting. It hung in my house for years. But what I loved about this painting, its real name is Keep Looking, because in real life, it's a 36 by 36. You can actually look at it and look at it and look at it and keep seeing different things, like around the edges, around the margins. I've got all sorts of calculations. I'm useless with math, but I would find these heavy duty calculations, or they looked heavy duty, online, calculating the speed of tornadoes or whatever. And I just looking at them for what uh, they were formed quite beautifully, just visually, not for what they stood for. So I used them around the margins. There are all sorts of them, or little bits of scientific drawings, or little bits from architectural drawings. I use those quite a lot. I'd like to, but I end up adding too much and then getting attached to the effort that I put into that. But it's an exercise I should take myself back to. It was hard. Now, this I have hanging in my house. Again, two pieces that weren't painted to be a diptych. They're again 24 by 30 each. And this was again trying to be as minimalist as possible, but still interesting. And at the time that I did this, and still today, I was very inspired by graffiti. Not the fact that it defaces property that doesn't belong to somebody, but the freedom of it and the randomness of the lettering in particular. I think it's more not those big bubble letters, but the more the tagging, just the randomness of that and scribbly scrawly. So again, just for the sake of the shape of what that is and just how random it is, like when rocks are weathered, it's quite random how they're weathered. So I think there's that randomness, that freedom that I like. And then on the one on the right, I used stencils, but I randomly selected the letters, and actually not so randomly because I go by feel. It feels like I want a D shape, but maybe I want to flick it around so that it's the wrong way around. I definitely have preference for certain shapes of letters. I'm fond of 3s and 5s, fond of 4s. They lend themselves well to be flipped around or upside down. There, yeah, that's how these two came about. And again, they were completely different paintings before, and then I whited out most of them. And for me, that was the right thing to do.
Well, Sharon, that whiting out really makes the one on the right resemble a Chinese landscape painting to me. You know, with the minimalism of the maybe inked mountains at the bottom and the rest of it just covered in cloud. And then a couple of gigantic figures maybe appearing out of the mist. But what you've been saying so far, and I just made a note of a few phrases that keep popping up. You've talked about minimalism, about going your own way and following your intuition and feelings. And again, balance, you know, feeling the sense of balance. Is there a kind of a sense of spirituality that you feel going into, coming out of, around your paintings? Is that part of it?
I think there definitely is. I would say I'm quite spiritual, but
Mhm.
I don't know what that means exactly. But yes, there is, and I think it's one of the things I want my work to achieve for others is that something, it's something spiritual. I can't put it into words exactly, but yeah, something that maybe moves you inside, something that maybe makes you want to just sit and look at that for a bit. Maybe it's a bit of an escape.
Well, how do people respond to your paintings? You know, when you've exhibited, what are people's reactions?
Um, a lot of what I want to achieve. So I have heard people quite often, people have said it's very calming,
Mm.
or it's very interesting. I can keep looking at it. I have had quite a lot of that. I've donated quite a lot of my art to hospitals because I really, really, really would find it so satisfying if I knew that people in distress could have a split second of comfort or calming when they see my work. That for me is the ultimate meaning. I did. This is just a funny aside. I was once hanging some of my art for a show, and it was at our municipal hall in their foyer, and they have contractors coming in and out to pay for licenses, that kind of thing. And this one fellow who was sort of in construction boots, so I think he was a contractor. He walked by and he stopped and he looked at it and he said, I get that it's abstract, but what is it? So I
Fantastic.
have had that comment. So I think this is my best painting. This one and the yellow one, but for totally opposite reasons. I think this is very busy in some ways, and yet it's also not that busy. This took me a very, very, very long time. A lot of back and forth, a lot of fine working with a pen. Those from my realistic days, I really like the fine marking that comes right at the end of the painting. So this took me a very long time to part with. I held on to it forever before I managed to say, okay, somebody else can have this now. But it's a work that I often go back to and think, how did I do that? And can I do that again? I haven't been able to, but at least it's a goal. Sometimes things happen that there's one or two paintings I keep in my studio. I call them teaching paintings because I think, how the heck did I do that? And I can still learn from it.
Yeah, the layers in this one remind me of what you were saying before about sense of history as
Mm.
well. So how do you feel about that? Why is that so important to you? I know you touched on our relationship with the environment and how maybe you can see, traces of people before, but why is that history, those almost archaeological layers, why is that so significant to you?
I don't know because it's at a very instinctive level, but some of the things that I've thought about quite a lot, and maybe these are the things that find their way into your art without you realizing it, is that we really are a sum of parts as people. Our past experiences um, make their way into who we are. So there's history, there's an accumulation of history in how we show up. I just have been reading, I'm fascinated by genetics and the microbiome and all these little things that make us up. And I was just fascinated to read recently that very significant parts of who we are as people come through our genes from who others in our past were and what happened to them, and they show up in us. So I just think it's part of the messiness of life is that everything from before is here now in different ways. I often think when I'm walking my dog in the forest, I'm often thinking things like, gee, that water in that stream has been here for eons. It's the same water. It's just been recycled and it's just come back. Or the air that I'm breathing is the same air that the dinosaurs breathed. All of these kind of crazy thoughts of past coming into present.
I completely get that. And one thing that I've been reflecting on recently with regards to poetry and painting and photography is presence, of how it brings you into the present with its very physical and obvious presence. The color, the textures, the line, and then in poetry, the rhythm, the rhyme, and the texture of the words as well. You can't you can't slip into the future or slip back into the past. It brings you into the present with its presence. And this painting certainly has an extremely strong presence in a similar way and in a similar intensity to the yellow one. But you're right, for very different reasons. This one draws me in with curiosity. I want to touch it, I want to explore it. But the yellow one draws me in just with its gravity. I just want to be there, a little bit like a Mark Rothko painting. I just want to sit with its presence, like I feel it's going to tell me something. I don't know what, but I'm eager to listen.
Yeah, that's just lovely to hear. Poetry is a talent that I really admire because I just don't have it. But what I love about the power of poetry is that it is able to bring things from somewhere into the present consciousness, like very few other things can do. I think that's why art is so important. That's why poetry is so important. That's why music is so important. I think it's because it puts us in touch with things that we need to be in touch with. So we're moving into some more recent work. This one I did this year. It's a 48 by 48. And it's got mixture of my own evolution as an artist. So trying to be to have more background than foreground, but then trying to balance that out. The whole graffiti, some color, some no color. So this was just a combination I could see of my evolution of influences as an artist. You can see that right up at the top, there's a cross in the background on an earlier layer. It's just quite interesting. There's a U shape there. It's a letter.
One thing I was thinking about looking at the last 2 or 3 pieces, they all look very confident to me. I mean, do you approach these pieces with confidence, or does it feel like you're kind of groping along, trying to find something?
The latter. Every painting is such a struggle, such a struggle. I just feel like I'm problem solving all of the time. And I create other problems by trying to solve problems. And then in the end, I'm quite glad that there were those problems, because things came about that I wouldn't have thought of if I tried to pre-plan it. And there's a lot of life's lessons for me in that as well. I think just in my building of my own resilience and stamina in the world, I've learned through painting, okay, there's a problem, just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. And somehow you'll find a way out. You always do, and I do. So no, it's very much groping through the dark, Alan. Painful.
I also got the image of walking through a maze trying to find your way out.
Yes, very much so. And going into a lot of dead ends. So this one I did probably in the last few weeks, and I've actually subsequently worked on this more, because this was one that I thought was finished, which is why I sent it to you. And then it kind of niggled me, and so I just refined it a little bit. It didn't change it very much. So this is from a new series that I started a few weeks ago called At the Circus. You know what? I don't like circuses particularly, but I didn't start with the title. I started with the paintings, and I noticed that I was painting. Actually, the next painting is actually the first one in this series. If you want to flick to that, Alan, yeah, that one is the first one in the series. I started with this banner at the top that had, if you remember some of my very first paintings, that patchwork. And I kind of liked that, and it allowed me to sort of have nothingness underneath it. And then I thought, oh, it looks a bit like a circus tent, the stripes of the circus tent, and maybe the panel at the top. The title At the Circus came to me, and it's so interesting that the story just at the circus has been so instrumental and so helpful to me with my compositions in this series. So all of them have this patchwork banner at the top. And then I don't know if you know the English artist. He's deceased now, but his name is Peter Lanyon. He used to go up, he was a landscape painter. He used to go up in a microlight to get an aerial view of the landscape, and then he would be very abstract in how he executed these aerial landscapes. But then he became very taken with the air currents, how he would be buffeted about and swoosh on them. And he then tried to capture the air currents in his art, which I thought was just fascinating. And that led me to think of in a circus tent, imagine if the acrobats left trails in the air like an airplane does, and you can see that trail of where an airplane's been. What would the air look like in the circus tent? And so a lot of my markings and paintbrush directions will have some of the movement of maybe trapeze artists or acrobats that are spinning. So if we go to the previous one again, that one in particular, the markings are of the acrobats that just kind of spin and flip and flip and flip and flip. That's totally, or the people with the hula hoops, totally where those markings came from. It would be really interesting if we could see those air currents created by movement.
That was a fascinating description of what you're doing here and the things you've been thinking about.
It's been lovely to talk to you because I do sense like-mindedness. Yes.
But Sharon, I just want to thank you so much for participating. It was a real treat to go through your work and talk about your thinking process. I was inspired in some ways.
That's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor, and thank you for your graciousness in corresponding with me about Megan Morrison's talk. It was so interesting. You and Paul were asking her questions, and things were coming up, and I thank you for being open to that conversation.
Thank you. Me too. I just realized that I wasn't following you. I think I followed someone else accidentally. So
Well,
let's get in
lucky them.
I've unfollowed them since, but let's keep in touch. It's
Okay,
real
lovely,
pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.
lovely.